Hello and welcome to the Essential Oil Show. I'm Debra Sofia Magdalene and I'm delighted to welcome as my very first guest on the Essential Oil Show, my dear friend Jazz Rasool, who has been such a massive impact on my life as a dear friend and a dear mentor whilst I've been going through his Energy Diamond coaching program, which was just phenomenal. And Jazz is just one of the most brilliant minds that I know on this planet. Jazz, welcome to this first episode, and please will you give us just a brief outline as to your background and why you know so much about essential oils.
Yeah, I originally was studying physics at university, and I got very interested as a result in the brain and the physics of the brain. And I decided to go and study a master's degree in molecular biology and drugs research, specifically drugs that work on the brain, anesthetics, anti-epileptics, and so on. But that got me asked to be a teacher at various colleges, including colleges of homeopathy and aromatherapy. People want to understand how those things worked, and it turns out that aromatherapy, homeopathy, they tend to work on the same locations biologically in the body as anesthetics, hence why certain essential oils sedate people and other ones stimulate them. They act on the same place that causes loss of consciousness through anesthetic, for example. So when I discovered that, it led me to teach on that subject in the UK, in Europe, and also abroad.
So who are you teaching?
I was actually teaching practitioners who were students studying aromatherapy or homeopathy. They were training to become practitioners. So I went to colleges of homeopathy and presented at conferences to do with aromatherapy to existing practitioners, but also to students who are learning about essential oils for the first time.
Okay. Now, we have a mutual friend, Dr. Manjia Samantha Lawton, and she interviewed me recently for her Magdalene Mystery School, and she said to me that you were one of her teachers when she was a GP, and that you have the best description of essential oils that she'd ever come across about how they work. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, when I met Angia, it was when she was very interested as a GP to learn about energy medicine. And she was looking at lots of different therapies that were out there and trying to look at the science behind them. And when I happened to be presenting to her on homeopathy, energy medicine in general, I referred to a problem that existed with homeopathy and aromatherapy. I came through to aromatherapy from homeopathy because when I was doing my master's degree, I was studying molecular biology of drugs and looking at how drugs acted on the body. And someone asked me to go and teach at a college of homeopathy because they wanted someone to come along and present on the science behind how it might work. And I didn't really know anything about homeopathy at the time, but I did my research and found out possible mechanisms for how it could work. But one of the things that I was told about homeopathic remedies was that they could have their effects interfered with by certain essential oils. And I thought, well, that's curious. How is it that something that's, essentially got no pharmacological compound in it, like a homeopathic remedy, could have its effect interfered with in the body by something that's clearly got pharmacological aspects to it in terms of actual molecules of oils, for example, And I thought, how can something material, like an essential oil, influence something that's supposedly pure energy, like a homeopathic remedy? And I started to look up on the science behind essential oils and look at the molecular biology of it and try and understand what's going on in the body. But there were some curious things that got my interest piqued. For example, there were essential oils that could stimulate one person, but then they could relax somebody else. So they could have completely opposite effects. And that always puzzled me. I thought, how can one substance cause two completely opposite effects in different people? And then, of course, you realize that the essential oils work in a restorative way. Their job isn't necessarily to stimulate or necessarily to relax or sedate. The ones that are prescribed appropriately, they will restore a person back to normal levels of well-being in terms of their consciousness, their emotions, or in terms of their physiology. And as a consequence, I thought, oh, that's an interesting thing to go and have a look at. Whereabouts in the body do these oils act in order to cause stimulation or sedation? Now, you've got to remember, for my master's degree, I was studying anesthetics, and I was also studying neuralgesics, which are drugs which are used to relax muscles prior to surgery. But they all act in the same territory in the body. In order for a person to be anesthetized, the anesthetic has to obviously go and act in the body somewhere to make a person's body numb, if it's a local anesthetic, for example. But if it's a general anesthetic, then that anesthetic has to go and act on something to do with the person's consciousness, to make them lose consciousness. So it's kind of obvious if you think about it. If an anesthetic makes you lose consciousness, then the molecules of the anesthetic, the drug, must act somewhere in the body that's responsible for consciousness. And if you could locate where the molecules go and act, then you probably found yourself a site where consciousness can be influenced. It can be stimulated or it could be sedated, for example. In sedation, an anesthetic could take someone out, knock them out, if it's a general anesthetic. If it's a local anesthetic, then that sedation acts to numb that local area, so that a local operation could be carried out, for example. Now, interestingly enough, essential oils do the same kind of thing. They seem to sedate people, and in other cases they stimulate. So I began to wonder whether there was any link between where the anesthetics were acting and where the essential oils were acting, and also where the homeopathic remedies were acting. And it turned out that all three acted on the same biological territory in the body.
Which is what?
Well, when an anesthetic's taken, the conventional science behind how anesthetic works, it acts on neurons, it acts on nerves, obviously, in order to numb you and make you lose consciousness. In terms of losing general consciousness, it has to act on the neurons, the brain cells, inside your brain. And the drug molecules of the anesthetic have to go and block biological activity to do with consciousness. Actually something that emerges from the neurons. Now, inside the neurons, every neuron has a kind of skeleton to it, a kind of cellular skeleton. It's scaffolding that holds the cell together. And this scaffolding isn't just something that holds the cell together, it's an internal kind of skeleton to the cell as well. And it literally holds the integrity of the cell together, but it also has a secondary function. The skeleton of the cell, the membranes of the cell, it's all made of what might be called liquid crystal architectures. Okay, so if you look at a conventional crystal, like a quartz crystal, it's obviously solid. It doesn't move around or anything. But then there are other crystals which are more liquid in nature, and they contain some kind of structure, but they're more fluid. So the liquid crystal you might have in a computer display or a watch, they're examples of liquid crystals, and they change in their activity depending on whether electrical signals pass through them or not, or whether the quality of water in them is different. So there are these internal architectures to every one of our neurons, which are made up of these liquid crystal kind of frameworks. And the actual scaffolding that holds the cell together is made up of tubes of protein. These tubes of protein, they're called microtubules. Okay, now you can go and Google that term, microtubule, and look it up on Wikipedia. You'll find it in any standard cellular biology book. And what you'll discover is that microtubules they literally form the skeleton of the cell, their cytoskeleton. Okay, that's what they're known for. But they don't just, as I said, have the job of holding the cell together. They act as a substrate, they act as a surface on which many chemical reactions in the cell take place. Okay, so without the cytoskeleton, without these microtubules, you wouldn't have a lot of the chemical reactions that happen in the cell. They just wouldn't take place. Now, it turns out anesthetics, what they do is molecules of anesthetics, they attach themselves to these tubes of protein, these microtubules, and they seem to influence the electrical currents that run alongside of them. So it appears that these tubes of protein, this internal skeleton for every single cell, it's not just a skeleton, it's also a surface on which a lot of chemical reactions take place for the cell, but it also acts, more importantly, a bit like the nervous system of the cell. Okay, so all these tubes of protein are like nerves for the cell itself. So a lot of communication happens internally within the cell by electrical signals running along these tubes of protein that make up the skeleton of the cell, the cytoskeleton. So these tubes of protein, as I said, are called microtubules because they literally are tubes that are microscopic and that are made of protein. Now, the protein elements that make up the microtubules, the protein is called tubulin because it forms the tube-shaped structure of the microtubule. And the tubulin protein is where all the action happens with the anesthetics. But it's also the place where action happens with regards to homeopathic remedies and essential oils. It seems they all act on these little building blocks, these tubulin blocks of protein that are the building blocks for these tubes of protein that make up the nervous system of the cell. And it appears that when molecules of an essential oil or anesthetic come into the vicinity of these tubes of protein, the electrical current along the tubes of protein, the nervous system activity, if you like, of the cell, gets influenced. It gets to change. Now, if you change the electrical activity of the nervous system of a cell, you can actually change the chemistry of the cell. You can actually make it become more active, or you can make it more sedate. But what was interesting was in anesthetics research, when an anesthetic acts on these tubes of protein, and it seems to shut down the electrical currents running along these tubes of protein. And when these electrical currents are interfered with in that way, it appears to shut the neuron down. And that in a local area would cause numbness in that part of the body. But when it comes to the brain, it causes the person to lose consciousness, or it makes them at least more sedated, in a minimal kind of way. So the anesthetic acts on these tubes of protein. It shuts the electrical currents down, or at least, reduces the electrical activity. And as a consequence, a person experiences anesthesia. It could be local anesthesia, or it could be general anesthesia. Now, it turns out the essential oil molecules, they usually have a ring of carbon atoms that are part of the essential oil molecule. Now, what's interesting is that essential oil molecules, having this ring of carbon atoms, is a really important aspect of their activity. The ring of carbon atoms has attached to it a little bit of electricity, a little electrical particle called an electron. It's known as a lone electron. And the lone electron whizzes around the ring of carbon electron atoms, and as it whizzes around, it creates a magnetic field. Okay. Now, when you take this essential oil molecule with its ring of carbon atoms and a lone electron whizzing around having its magnetic field, and you bring that next to a microtubule with lots of electrical activity going up and down it, the magnetic activity of the little lone electron influences the flow of electricity along the microtubule. And it acts in the same way as anesthetic does. It either slows it down or speeds it up or cuts it off. It sedates the person to various levels. Now, it's possible that you can have things obviously come next to the microtubules and the electrical currents, and instead of just interfering with it and slowing down the electrical currents or reducing the level of them and causing sedation and loss of consciousness and numbness, you can have the opposite effect. You can have something come along and actually enhance the electrical activity, and obviously make a lot more electrical activity going along that area. in that case, you don't get sedation, you get stimulation. All right. So through one effect and one structure, it's possible to get sedation and loss of consciousness, numbness, that emanates collectively from all the various cells that are affected. But it's also possible to get the opposite. It's possible to get stimulation as well, and to raise the electrical activity of what's going on. And when you look at that collectively over the whole brain, it lifts the person's consciousness to a different level of awareness. It shifts them to a higher kind of level of activity where they feel stimulated and more awake, as opposed to relaxed and being asleep. So all of this happens as a result of, if you're looking at breaking it down to the most simple level, it happens because of this ring of carbon atoms with this little lone electron and its little magnetic field influencing the electrical current going up and down this tube of protein. So this tube of protein and the electrical activity going up and down it, it's the biological site of consciousness. Okay? And the level of consciousness is directly related to the amount of electrical activity that's running along these tubes of protein that make up the skeleton of every cell. So if you can influence the electricity along these tubes of protein, you're influencing the activity of the nervous system of a cell. And when you look at that collectively, you're affecting the nervous system of a person as a whole. You're affecting their brain, how it works. You're affecting how the nervous system communicates with the immune system. You're affecting how the nervous system communicates with the endocrine system. You're affecting the overall well-being of the individual. And it all comes down to these little tubes of protein and how you influence the electricity that's running alongside of them. It all comes down to that.
Absolutely incredible. Jazz, what about people's individual body chemistry? Because everybody's unique. So like an essential oil, like lavender, for example, can be a stimulant or it can be a sedative. And does that depend on each person's body chemistry?
Yeah, what I've shared with you is the initial part of the story, which is where the electrical currents are getting influenced. Now, there's two things which will determine whether you're going to get a sedative effect or a stimulatory effect. The first thing is actually to do with the nature of water there is inside the body. Now, it turns out these tubes of protein, which electrical currents run along, they're literally the wiring of the cell. These tubes of protein are hollow. Okay, they are a tube, and inside the center of these tubes of protein is the tubes of protein are filled with water. Okay, now it turns out that when you haven't got an anesthetic or an essential oil or something else influencing the electricity along these tubes of protein, you have to ask a question, which is, well, what's making that electricity flow? What's making it happen to be there in the first place? You know, and the flow of electricity, our everyday consciousness and awareness, that seems to be boiled down to the electrical current along all these tubes of protein. That electrical current is actually generated by, or it's influenced by, the water that's inside the tubes of protein. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the way to look at it is, if you look at a record player, it has a needle which plays on a vinyl record, and the needle picks up the bumps on the vinyl record, and the bumps, courtesy of an electromagnet, are turned into sound waves, electrical waves, which are then turned into sound waves, which we hear. Okay, so the needle acts as a way of turning bumps into electricity, which can then be turned into the original sound that was recorded on the vinyl record. Okay.
Yeah.
Now it turns out that if you look at the electrical activity along the microtubules, which is associated with our consciousness, if you think of that as a sound, the output coming from a speaker, for example, in a similar kind of way to the way the record player works, then the equivalent of the needle, the thing that picks up the original kind of song and then turns it into the sound, is the water molecules inside the microtubules. The water molecules are like needles. They literally are influenced in terms of their activity by vibrations in the quantum vacuum, in the empty space. that they're in. They're literally picking up vibrations from space and time.
Mm.
And then those vibrations, the movement of those water molecules, influences the electrical activity along the microtubules. And obviously that goes on to affect our consciousness as well as cellular chemistry. So the water molecules act like the gramophone record needle. They're picking up vibrations from space and time that we're buried in, from our energy field almost, and they're converting them into the electrical currents that we see on the electromicrotubules. So it's a two-way bit of traffic. The electrical activity along the microtubules can also influence the actual vibrations via the water molecules. So it goes both directions. Okay, so if you've got an essential oil that comes along and interferes with the electrical currents along the microtubules, that's going to influence via the water molecules the vibrations in the energy field, and it's going to change your energy field. Okay, but equally the energy field via the water molecules influences the electrical currents. Now that's why anesthetic, if it interferes with the electrical activity of the microtubules, it influences how consciousness is being picked up from a non-material space and being converted into something material, like neuronal reactions and things like that. That's what the anesthetic's doing. It's interfering with the flow of energy from our energy field into our physical bodies. And it's doing it by blocking the gateway, the microtubules. And essential oils are doing nothing really any different. They're influencing the flow of energy from our energy field into, and how it's transmuted into physical chemical reactions inside of our cells. It's like you know, being a kind of bit of a gatekeeper, so to speak. So you have this unusual property where anesthetics, essential oils, homeopathic remedies, they can not only influence a person's consciousness and their cellular chemistry, but you can also have the reverse too. You can have consciousness coming through, and it can influence the effect of the essential oil. Okay, so if someone is in a state of stimulation and they need to be sedated, then the amount of stimulation that they're in is something that's echoed in terms of the energy field, what's going on in the energy field. And the water molecules will pick that up, and they'll pass that on to the microtubules. It'll influence the electrical activity along there in a certain kind of way. And when the essential oil comes along and interacts with that electrical current, it's going to be different compared to someone who is in a state of sedation and needs stimulation, for example. All right? That when the essential oil molecule with its little lone electron and magnetic field binds onto the microtubule, there's a kind of settling, if you like, that takes place. Mm-hmm. And the result is that the electrical activity is kind of normalized. And that's why someone who's in a state of stimulation will get sedated, and someone who's sedated will get stimulated, because there's a normalization that happens between the essential oil molecule and its carbon ring of atoms and its magnetic field coming from its little lone electron, and what's coming from the energy field via the water molecules and the electrical activity that they create along the microtubule. So
it creates a balance in the body.
Yeah, it's different for different people, because the water molecules are picking up different vibrations from the quantum vacuum, the space-time field, and you are getting a different electrical representation along the microtubules. Now, when the essential oil comes along and it acts on a microtubule of someone who's sedated, the electrical activity that it's interacting with is different compared to someone who is in a state of stimulation. So the essential oil isn't doing anything different in itself, but it's encountering something which is different. And as a result, the effect of that is that you get restoration. You don't get explicit stimulation or explicit sedation, you get restoration. And in the case of someone who's sedated, you'll get a stimulating effect. Okay, and that will create restoration and balance. In the case of someone who's stimulated, it'll create a sedating effect, and it'll restore them, to a normal level of activity based on that. So again, the essential oil isn't doing anything different. It's just reacting differently to the electrical activity that's present, which is different because the water molecules generate a different electrical different electrical traffic along the microtubule from the energy field of someone who's sedated compared to someone who's stimulated.
That's fascinating. So presumably then, if somebody's doing spiritual work and they're looking to raise the vibration, the oils could vary from day to day depending on how high their vibration is at that moment in time.
Yeah, it's also important to consider, I mean, what you've said is, it highlights a really important caveat. When you work with homeopathic remedies, essential oils, or you do energy medicine work, or even someone who's on anesthetics or painkillers, for example, right? And that is that when you know, for example, that a homeopathic remedy is causing a specific effect on someone, and you bring in an essential oil, and you know it works on the same biological territory, that there's the possibility the essential oil is going to interfere with the homeopathic remedy. Certainly that's a possibility, but of course the opposite's true as well. Instead of interfering with it in a negative way, the essential oil could, if you match it right to the right homeopathic remedy, it's possible to actually enhance a healing effect instead of interfere with it. So inevitably there's going to be some good matches with certain homeopathic remedies of a certain picture of symptoms that they're meant to work with, and certain essential oils with a certain picture of symptoms they're meant to work with. If you bring them together, there's not going to be interference or dissonance, there's going to be resonance. They're going to enhance one another. They're going to be a complement to one another and help each other. So this is something that a lot of people, on the whole, tend not to do, because it's been shown that when you use too many therapeutic modalities together, there's a higher risk of side effects, because you don't know the underlying mechanisms of action, how they could influence each other. But if you do know the underlying mechanisms of action, and you do know how a specific homeopathic remedy is a complement to a certain essential oil, then actually you can use these things together. And rather than telling someone who's on a homeopathic remedy, don't go anywhere near these oils, you could say, actually, you can use this oil in conjunction with your homeopathic remedy, and you'll find that you get an enhanced, sustainable effect. Similarly, with someone who's using an essential oil, you can say to them, if you use this homeopathic remedy alongside of that essential oil, you'll probably find that effect is, something that's more easy to manage, or it's more effective or amplified in some kind of way. Now that's just with aromatherapy and homeopathy. But of course, because all this is linked down to the energy field of the body, of the person, it means anybody who does energy medicine work with a person is potentially going to interfere with the influence of an essential oil or a homeopathic remedy. But again, the same thing, if you know what the symptom picture is that the essential oil addresses and the homeopathic remedy addresses, there's no reason why you can't go in there with the right kind of intent in mind, or the right kind of practice, and in terms of energy medicine, to complement what the person's already doing. And of course the reverse applies too. If someone is going through some energy medicine treatment, maybe there's a specific essential oil or a specific homeopathic remedy which can be used in conjunction with that to really amplify the effect and minimize side effects. So this integrated form of medicine is something that very few people can practice effectively, because they don't really know how different things fit together.
Are there ways that you can actually test for that, like dowsing with a pendulum?
Well, that's just looking at the energy field. It's not looking at the combination of things. So testing for the combination of things is a little bit more difficult, because you'd probably have to test each individual thing that you're using. So the oil, the remedy, the energy medicine practice, meditation that you're thinking of. But then what you also want to test is perhaps just look at the three of those things together and see if there's a resonance there. If there's a dissonance, then you should probably pick that up through your dowsing or other method that you've got for evaluating, the validity of something, whether it's kinesiology or some other approach, muscle testing. So there's a variety of ways in which you could test things, but you would need to test all three of those things, not separately. You would need to find a way of testing them together. Mm-hmm. Because in the body, that's what's going on. They're not working separately. They're going to come together and influence one another, and there's going to be a collective effect.
Oh, brilliant! So that's absolutely fascinating, Jazz. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. Now, with essential oils, I was going to ask you, what's the best way of using them for spiritual purposes?
Well, typically the spiritual approach to using essential oils is something that's closely linked into something that is to do with the way the brain works. Now, most people who use essential oils, who know about the anatomy and physiology and chemistry of essential oils, know that they can affect our memory, our sense of memory. They can affect the hypothalamic limbic system, which is the emotional area of the brain, the center mammalian region of the brain. And they also have the ability to even affect our instincts at the reptilian part of the brain and our creative aspects, which is the neocortex, the newest layer of the brain. So oils can affect various layers of the brain. Now, what people don't necessarily know is that when you look at the brain, not just in terms of left brain, right brain, or reptilian, mammalian, or human layers of the brain, but you look also at the collection of these regions of the brain together in conjunction with the neuronal activity of the heart and the activity inside the gut. Collectively, these things actually make kind of a field, energy field. Okay, and this isn't mumbo jumbo or new age or anything like that. This is all established fact. The brain has an electrical field. It can be measured using EEG. The heart has a field. It can be measured through ECG. Right? And we know the gut has got a flora and fauna system to it, consisting of lots of bacteria and lots of life, which has its own field, especially around the solar plexus. Now, when you look at these fields together collectively and look at the field of a human being collectively, that field isn't just something that's a bit of something happens in a bit of space. Certainly it happens in the space of a person's body, yeah, and maybe in the space around them in a way that some people talk about things like aura, so things like that, for example. But the thing to consider is that that energy field also extends out into time. It extends into your past. It extends into your future. It can even extend possibly into other dimensions where science such as quantum physics tells us that there are parallel worlds where there are parallel lives that versions of us could be existing in. Mm-hmm. And it's all just a mirror or a projection of our own energy field in various forms. It's a bit like when you go into a hall of mirrors and there's obviously the immediate reflection in front of you, and then you have all these other reflections in these other mirrors, but none of these things is the real you. They're all just reflections. Okay, so who's to say that this version of you that you see is the real you? Mm. Who's to say this isn't just another projection amongst a whole bunch of other dimensions where there are mirrors of you in these other dimensions? And maybe there's something above all these dimensions where the real you actually is, the higher self that some people refer to, or the oversoul, or your soul, for example. So it's important to look at the science and what is fact, but then just extend it a little bit and accept if you do extend it a little bit and try and join all the dots, inevitably there's more to you than what you just see in the mirror. Now, science says that the universe, everything that we see physically, accounts probably just for only anything between 1% and 5% of what there is out there. Okay, mm-hmm. The rest of it they call either dark energy or dark matter. Now it exists, but we can't detect it because it doesn't seem to interact with normal matter in the way that bits of matter interact with each other through physics and chemistry. So when you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, you are looking at maybe 1% or 5% of yourself. Now, if you imagine something, 20 times, 100 times bigger than you, then that's the actual amount of substance that makes you up. But you only get to see 1% or 5% of that in that physical reflection that you see in the mirror. Okay. Now, when you realize that you are 100 times more substantial than what you see yourself physically, then you have to wonder, well, what would it be like, to have access to that other 99% of me, as opposed to just this physical 1% existence that I'm in. The way to look at it is like this. If that 1% that you're looking at in the mirror, that's just one copy of you, then it's like saying, well, there's another 100 copies of you out there.
Wow.
There's another 100 selves out there that make up your entire existence. And all these selves together collectively make up the entity that is you. But you're only getting to see one of those selves. What would it be like if you could communicate with those other selves? What if they all talk to each other and collectively had a common awareness or integrated awareness or consciousness? And it's like my little finger can touch the surface of my laptop here, and I can put one of my other fingers on the surface of the laptop, and on the surface these fingers look like they're separate. They look like they have distance between them, but of course at a higher level these fingers are all joined up into a hand, and the fingers have got the same blood going through them, but at the level where the fingers are touching the surface, it looks like they're separate. So in the same way, you can look at yourself and say, well, I'm in this world and I look like I'm separate from these other people or even my other selves and other dimensions. But if I just was to go up a few dimensions, if you like, I could see that all these selves are connected and they've got the same consciousness streaming through them, as opposed to the same blood. And who knows, maybe those fingers don't just join together into a hand, they're part of an arm that's part of a bigger body. And that in itself is part of something bigger. It can go up in a branch tree-like kind of structure like that. So I look at human beings in that kind of way. I don't just see myself in the mirror and go, that's me. I realize I'm an extension of something much, much bigger. And there's science to prove that in terms of dark matter and dark energy, which points to the fact that the physical stuff that we see is only a fraction of what's there. And then there's the logical kind of expansion of that, which says, well, okay, if there is another 95%, 99% of me that I can't see, then where is it? And same thing to do with your consciousness. What if the consciousness that you have is just 1% of your consciousness? And there's another 100 times that consciousness available to you, but you're just not aware of it. So this really takes you into spiritual territories where you begin to start asking questions about how do I get in touch with that other expanded aspect of my consciousness, and if so it's something. How do
essential oils help us do that?
Sorry?
How do essential oils help us to get into those realms?
Well, as I said, because essential oils access that empathic region of the brain, they don't just influence that, but also the other regions of the brain. They can also influence us through our gut if they're taken internally. Essentially what they're doing is affecting our field. They're affecting our field, how it is in space, but also how it is in time, across time. All right. Now, obviously, if the essential oils are doing that, then they're going to influence all the extended aspects of who we are. And some people refer to as extended aspects as the spiritual or spirit aspects of us. But I don't try and segregate it into parts where I say this is the physical body, this is the spirit, this is the soul, and so on. I prefer to look at it a bit like a rainbow. The rainbow has many different frequencies of light in it, and in a similar way, I could look at my body and say this is one frequency and my spirit's a different frequency. But the reality is, you need to stop looking at things in terms of specific colors. You need to get just look at the rainbow, right? It's bigger than just one color. It's bigger. You are bigger than one physical body that you see in the mirror. You're part of a spectrum. And what the essential oils do is influence your field and influence your ability to perceive the whole spectrum, influence your ability to sense and experience the whole rainbow. So rather than just seeing things in the visible, to use a metaphor, you'd be able to see in the ultraviolet or the X-ray. But what we're talking about here is, rather than just seeing yourself in a physical body, you begin to sense your emotional aspects. You begin to sense your intellectual, mental aspects, but you also begin to detect and see and experience your spiritual colors of the spectrum, your soulful aspects of the spectrum too. So you begin to really expand your awareness and sensitivity and experience into these more extended aspects of your field, out into space and time and out into other dimensions.
So the essential oils will all have a unique vibration as well, which will have a different impact on maybe how you perceive things.
Yeah, remember that they act on parts of the body where the vibrational frequency or nature of this energy field that you're in is being converted into a physical form. Okay, the water molecules are turning energetic vibrations into electrical currents, and then the essential oils come along and can influence that. They can be influenced by it, but the essential oils can also influence what's there. They can influence the vibrations of the field. Okay, so it can influence your consciousness. It can influence your extensions of your consciousness into the field and all of its dimensions. So each one, just like a homeopathic remedy, is going to have a unique effect on the vibrational field. And it depends on what's already in the vibrational field. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why essential oil doesn't have a fixed effect on people. In some cases, depending on what's in the vibrational field, it can sedate the person. In other cases, it will stimulate them. But typically, you will see a restorative normalization function at least going on that respects what's in the vibrational field at the time the oil encounters the person.
Yeah, fascinating. I know there's some oils are particularly good. I mean, we know that the three wise men, you know, the kings brought gold, frankincense and myrrh to Jesus, you know, as a child, or to Mary. Why do you think those three oils in particular, or I mean the gold obviously isn't an oil, but the frankincense and myrrh?
I think there are families of, I wouldn't necessarily say oils, but I would say there are certain families of substances which have more effect spiritually than others. So, you know, if you take Native American white sage, for example, which is often used for cleansing runes, if you take oil, sage oil, then that form is very different from just burning leaves, for example. And similarly with frankincense, if you take crystals of frankincense and you know, sublimate them and evaporate them with heat, then that effect is very different from working with frankincense oil. So the only thing I can reference is that in Chinese medicine, if you've got a physical problem, you typically go and get a herbal treatment for that. If you get something that's a cross between a physical problem and an emotional problem, maybe a psychosomatic problem, you would go and get acupuncture. If you get something which is maybe just physical, but maybe to do with your muscles and things like that, you would obviously get a massage. But if you've got something spiritual going on, a higher level thing going on, energetic disturbance of some kind, then you typically use Qigong to do that, medical form of Qigong. And I think it's a similar thing with oils. You would use things in certain format, certain substance, certain kind of solidity or liquidity, depending on what it is that you're trying to work on. Whether you're trying to work on something purely physical, emotional, or maybe even energetic or spiritual. So I think you need to use things in liquid form for certain kind of issues. And then there are other things that maybe you need to take in as a vapor, like, you know, frankincense or Native American sage being burnt, for example. And And then there are other elements like things like sweetgrass. Sweetgrass and Native American sage are meant to be used together, because one clears and the other one prevents negative energies. And I think with oils, it's very, very similar. They seem to have this property, certain families of them, which facilitate clearing of energies, and other ones don't just clear, but they act like a barrier. They prevent energies from either escaping or from coming in. Okay, so rather than looking at whether oils have a spiritual effect, it's probably more important to look at what they're doing with energy.
Okay.
Is the energy being helped to be released? Is it energy being brought in? Is the energy being circulated or distributed in some kind of way? When you look at it in that sense, then you begin to see how the oils can work in a common way with other approaches, whether it's energy medicine, qigong, reiki, homeopathy, whatever. Whenever you look at it, if you see that there's a need for energy to come into a person, and then there's a homeopathic remedy which can also allow energy to be brought into the person, and then there's a reiki treatment which works on bringing energy into the person, then all those three approaches will be complementary to each other. They'll help each other out. But what you don't want is to maybe use an oil to bring energy into a person and then have a homeopathic remedy which takes it out. Or
yeah, that's a really good.
Try to do cleansing with that person when actually you need to be, bring energy in.
Yeah.
And lastly, circulation, because circulation is a really important thing. If you've got negative energy inside the person, you probably want to remove that, and you secondly want to bring fresh energy in, and you want to circulate that around. What you don't want to do is do the other way around, okay, where you circulate the negative energy first, all right, and then try and bring in some fresh energy. That wouldn't be the way to go about doing it. It's a bit like asking someone to drink water, and just before they drink water, you put a drop of poison into the water. If you've got poisoned water, ideally you want the poison water to be filtered, so the poison's removed. Okay, and then you want to just have fresh water to drink, and then you want to make sure it goes everywhere it needs to, circulates around the body. So the three things that I talked about, which are bringing energy in, which is called toning or refreshing, cleansing, which is to do with removing energy that shouldn't be there, and then circulation, which is about taking energy that is there but might be just in the wrong place or is not distributed well enough in amongst the right places. Those are the three, if you like, activities that are common between all therapies. And as long as the therapies are working with the energy in the same way, they're not going to interfere with each other. Now, if I take peppermint and I link it to a certain homeopathic remedy, more often than not, there's going to be an interference. But the question is that interference a positive one? Is it bringing in energy or relieving energy or circulating energy in the way that is desired? If it is, then it's not something to be considered as an interference. It should be considered as that the two are actually helping each other out in the way that they need to. So if you think in terms of what things are doing in terms of moving energy, then you'll probably find that that's more helpful, because that's usually a prelude to there being a spiritual transformation. Usually it's followed by emotional transformation or mental transformation or physical transformation, and together those things lead to a collective effect which can go on and cause a spiritual transformation.
That's enormously helpful. Thank you so much, Jazz. Jazz, before we finish the interview, is there anything that you want to add to this discussion that you think is a key point that we've not discussed?
Well, often people ask, is there one thing I can do, to bring about a transformation to whatever my condition is or whatever is going on in my life? And I usually say to people, look, you can look at it in three ways that can be boiled down to one way. And it kind of links to what I just said about energies. And that is that when you're working with taking away energy or, bringing in or circulating, really what you're doing is just doing one of three things. You need to know what it is you need to have more of. You need to know what it is that you need to have less of, and you need to know what just to leave alone because it doesn't need to be changed. If you woke up each morning and you looked at your life or whatever's going on for you, it could be to do with your diet or exercise or work, whatever, and you just ask yourself, what do I need to do more of today? What do I need to do less of? And what do I just need to leave alone because it's not broken, doesn't need fixing? If I just knew those three things, and I went and did those things, my life would, end up being full of balance and harmony. But you can boil it down to even something simpler, which is that if you were to just remove the unnecessary challenges that you have to your life, then by default, whatever is left is a necessary challenge. It's what you're meant to be dealing with. Whether it's a challenge or whether it's something else, whatever it is, whatever's left over, that's the real stuff that you're meant to deal with. So discovering what your unnecessary challenges are, finding the things that are taking away your energy unnecessarily, but equally finding the things that bring energy to you unnecessarily. Finding the things that keep moving your energy unnecessarily. Okay, if you could find those things and just remove them, then what happens is you're left with only the things that bring you energy that's necessary. You're left with the things that only take away energy and cleanse energy that's necessary. You're only left with the things that need to move energy in a particular way, in a necessary fashion. All right. So it all boils down to just removing unnecessary challenges. Okay. If you can do that, the result will be that your energy will harmonize because you're only working on what's necessary. And that's a big art and science in itself. Just discovering what's unnecessary, just getting it out of the way, just to leave what's really necessary and what you've got to work with. That's a lifelong thing. But if you're a practitioner, then you probably might have a better sense of what's unnecessary for a person if you're really tuned into them, compared to what they might be able to sense for themselves. So my final message would probably be about that. It would just say, just go find what's unnecessarily challenging you and get rid of it, process it, deal with it. And you can bet that whatever you're left with, that's where you're really meant to be, putting your attention and your intentions and your energy.
This actually takes me back to when I was doing the Energy Diamond coaching with you, because the system that you've developed does that beautifully, doesn't it? It looks at profiling each individual to look at what's supporting them, what's challenging them, where they need to grow.
Yeah, because that's what came out of all the years of work that I did in the different complementary therapies. I realized what was common between them. And I realized that therapy can work with that therapy, providing they're operating with the same mechanism. If that one's removing energy, provided this is removing energy too, they'll be able to work together. If this is supporting what's going on here, it's not always the case that you need something else to come in and support things. Sometimes you need another cofactor which challenges something that's unnecessary. So you want to support something which is necessary, but you want to challenge something which is unnecessary. And you need something to be able to get a sense of which of these things do you need to do. You need something complementary, something that offers a reflective kind of view of, okay, that needs to be supported and reinforced, and that needs to be challenged, and it needs to be made different in some kind of way. So you've got this moderator as well. So support, challenge, and reflection, that's how you're working with the energies. It goes right back to ancient times in terms of principles of yin and yang, the idea that you take a feminine approach, support it, and reinforce what's there, or you take an active male, masculine approach, and you challenge what's there, and you try and make it different. And then there's the Tai Chi, which is the harmony between the yin and the yang, which is the reflective, moderative component, which says, okay, I'm deciding what to do with these energies. Should I reinforce? Should I challenge and make different? Or should I just let things stay as they are? And this relates to what I said earlier about what do you want more of, what do you want less of, and what do you want to leave alone? But even then, that can be boiled down to just what's unnecessary here. Remove that. Whatever you've got left is what's necessary. And that's what you're meant to work with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautiful. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they look you up?
They can go to my website, energydiamond.com, or just look me up on the internet under my own name, jazzrasool.com. Either way, they'll find me, and there's a contact page where people can send me a message, and I receive all messages personally, so I can respond to people directly.
Just thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your wisdom, which is it's just surpassed all my expectations. You've just shared so much with us. I feel like I've been on a fast and furious course. I've taken lots and lots of notes, and just brilliantly explained. So thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this interview, do subscribe to receiving more interviews. We are going to be interviewing experts in the field in many, many different areas of essential oils. So thank you for tuning in to this episode, and we look forward to speaking with you again. Bye-bye.